and who makes up the population is going to have an effect on the demand for good or service. So if you increase the overall population, odds are you're increasing the number of people that are going to be willing or able to buy that good. The size of the market is increasing. So we'd expect the demand curve to shift to the right. It's going to increase. So at every price, now that there's more people willing and able to buy, there's going to be a higher quantity demanded at that like same price. Not only the entire population comes into play, but also demographics. So if you have a certain age group that's growing, you have a certain race or ethnicity that's growing. If we get a gender imbalance or solve or end a gender imbalance, you'll have different industries that will cater to those different groups. So they'll change as those characteristics change. So for instance, all those baby boomers are now getting old and retiring. So an increase in elderly population that they're causing is going to increase the demand for medical care. So we'll see the demand curve for medical care shift to the right. We'll see the demand for life alerts shift to the right, for old folks' homes, for all the stuff that goes wrong with elderly people. I don't know, if a bunch of Italians move into the area, we expect tomato sales to go up as they all start making marinara sauce. My grandma guards her tomato sauce recipe very, very tightly. It took me a long time to convince her to let me have it. So yeah, as the demographics may be even more important, especially like if you're like running a business yourself, the demographics that you're dealing with in your market can have a major impact on the demand for your product. And finally, there's the changes in expectations about future prices. So consumers don't only choose what they want to buy, but they also choose when they want to buy these goods and services. So you think about it, future products are a substitute for current products. You can buy something now, or you could wait and buy it in the future. So if you expect there's going to be an increase in the price tomorrow, so tomorrow they're going to, use an extreme example, double the price of something, odds are you're going to go out and buy it today. Again, because you want to lock in that lower price, rather than waiting a day and then having to pay more. Conversely, if you expect there's going to be a decrease in the price tomorrow, if you think like, there's going to be a sale or something going on, you're going to decrease your demand today. If a sale for something, say, starts Saturday, you'll wait until Saturday to buy, even if you were planning on buying it today. Because now, like, why spend the extra money for to have it one day earlier? So an example that I'm sure a lot of you have done, if you find out the price of gas is going to change tomorrow, if it's going to go up, you increase your demand today, so you go and fill up before the price increase. In that situation, the demand curve shifts to the right. So at the same price, we have a greater quantity being demanded. So Apple has a policy that strongly discourages. So basically, you'll get fired or like severely reprimanded. Their employees from speculating about when a new model is going to come out. And I'm sure it also strongly discourages talking about some of the features of that new model, whether it's an iPhone, iPad, whatever. So if a customer learns because of some employee, telling their friends that the new iPad is coming out next month when it hasn't been announced yet, this new model is a potential substitute for the current model. People, if they want an iPad, they can buy the new one, or the current one now, or wait a month and get the new one. Knowing that that customer, not like all customers in the economy, but that customer that has the inside information, they know that the price of the current model is likely to fall next month. So that's going to decrease the current demand. It's bad for Apple. If you know the price is going to fall next month, you're going to wait, buy it when it's cheaper. Or if you need the newest technology, you'll just wait a month and you'll get that new, nice iPad. All right. It's important to remember just for whether you're answering a question on an exam or trying to like talk through this stuff. Listen, there's a difference between a change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded. So a change in the quantity demanded, that's what a change in the price of a product is being examined. So a change in the quantity demanded, if this is your initial demand curve, you start at point A, the price drops to $400, you move along the demand curve to point B. So there's a change in the quantity demanded, but there's no change going on like in the market. There's nothing shifting the demand curve. We're just moving along that same demand curve when there's a change in the quantity demanded. Now, when there's a change in demand, that's when we have one of those 5 factors that causes the entire demand curve to shift. So in this case, it's moving from demand curve D1 to D2. So moving out from point A to point C. So we don't have a price change going on. In this case, we're still at $450, but we have an increase in the quantity demanded. So we have the entire curve shifting when there's a change in demand. Does that make sense to you guys? So in this section, we're going to look at the supply side of the market. Supply side is very, very similar to the demand side of the market. Only instead of looking at consumers, we're looking at firms deciding how much to produce, how much to bring to the market, that kind of stuff. There will be slightly different things that shift the supply curve for firms, though. So here we have a supply schedule. Again, pretty much the same thing as the demand schedule. We've got the price on the left there, so the price that they're charging for the product, in this case, the smartwatches. And we have the quantity supply. So at $450, Apple's willing to supply 7 million smartwatches. The price drops down to $400, they're willing to supply 6 million smartwatches. So on down to $250, they're willing to supply 3 million smartwatches. So we can graph this, again, on the same price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. We take these points, the price and the quantity from the supply schedule, and graph them, and we get our supply curve. Demand curves are always going to slope downward. Supply curves are going to slope upwards. So as a firm can get a higher price for their good or service, they're going to be willing to supply more for that good or service. So the quantity supplied is the amount of a good or service that a firm is willing or able to supply at a given price. So at the price of $400, the quantity supplied is 6 million smartwatches. $300, the quantity supplied is 4 million smartwatches. Now the law of supply is that holding all else constant, that ceteris paribus condition, an increase in price causes an increase in the quantity supplied, and a decrease in price causes a decrease in the quantity supplied. So they're going to move together. We have that the same relationship. Now the reason the supply curve slopes upwards is because the supply curve is basically the marginal cost of production for a firm. So as a firm goes from producing 3 million units to 4 million units, the cost of production is going to increase from $250 to $300. This is because it costs more to produce more. You have to pay more workers or have workers work longer hours. You have to buy more resources, so you may have to do that at a higher price. So you're bidding away resources from other uses. So basically, each point of the supply curve shows the minimum price that sellers have to receive in order to be willing to produce a good at that price. So now we can move along the supply curve, or just like demand, we can also shift the supply curve if something else is going on. If we're not holding all else equal, if something else is changing in the economy, then we'll have the supply curve shift. So a shift to the right. So in this case, moving from this supply curve 1 here, to this supply curve 3 there, that's going to be an increase in supply. So if we stay, and say the price is right here, and we move straight up, the price is still there, we're going to have a greater supply at that given price. And conversely, if we shift to the left, so that's moving from S1, the curve in the middle, to S2, curve on the far left, that's a decrease in supply. So that same price, we're going to see a lower quantity being supplied. Yeah, so even if the price doesn't change, when we increase the supply curve, that'll increase the quantity supplied. When we decrease the supply curve, that'll decrease the quantity supplied. So at every possible price, the quantity supplied is going to change. So if we decrease the supply curve from here to here, at any price, there's going to be lower supply than if we were still in that initial supply curve. Here we have 5 of the most common factors that influence the market supply. I don't think did I define the market supply? I don't think I did. So market supply is just the supply of the entire market. So for smartwatches, it's the supply, the production of all of the smartwatches from all the different companies that's being offered for sale. There's like the market demand, that's all the consumers. Market supply is all the producers. So the first one we'll look at is a change in the price of inputs. So inputs are the resources, the things we use in the production of good or service. So it includes things like labor, the people we have actually doing the work. You have to pay them wages. The capital, so the actual like machinery they're using in the factories to produce things, and the actual materials that go into the production. So if you increase the price of an input, that's going to decrease the profitability of selling the good, so that'll cause a decrease in the supply curve. In this case, it'll be, figure on the right, it's the top one moving from S1 to S2. So if the price stays the same, but we shift the supply curve to the left, at that same price, we'll have a lower quantity supplied. On the other hand, if we decrease the price of an input, so it's now cheaper, something going into production that good is now cheaper, it's going to increase the profitability of selling that good. So we'll have an increase in supply. The less costly, firms will be willing to supply more. Next is technological change. So firms can either experience positive or negative technological changes. Almost always, firms experience a positive technological change. So they come up with a new production method that's easier and simpler. They use new, better machines, better management techniques that keep their employees happy and make them more productive. All these different things that increase production. So they shift the supply curve to the right. However, there's also some negative things that can happen. So government restrictions on land use for agriculture, that may decrease the supply of wheat. If the government says you can't use as much, you have to leave, I don't know, a certain amount of land ungrown to maintain the nutrient balance in soil, which is important to keep your farm yields up over time. Maybe there's a natural disaster. A hurricane blows through and damages a facility, damages a restaurant. So negative ones do happen, although over time it's typically a positive technological change that we experience. And if there's that negative technological change, that shifts the supply curve to the left. That's going to decrease the supply. Next is the price of related goods. So firms can produce and sell many different alternate products. They have a choice of what they want to sell and what they want to produce. So if you look at the example of a farmer in Illinois can plant either corn or soybeans. So if the price of soybeans rise, they'll plant less corn. So we have the supply of corn shifting to the left. because this farmer can make more money selling soybeans, they're going to shift away from corn and into more soybeans. Sometimes two products are produced together, that in the production of one, you end up producing another. So cattle provides beef and leather. So there's an increase in the price of beef. Cattle farmers, raise more cows because of this increase in the price of beef. That's going to increase the supply of leather just because there are more cows. That's going to shift the supply curve to the right. Now the number of firms and expected future prices. Textbook lumped these two together. First, the number of firms. If there's more firms in a market, there's going to be more product available at any given price. There'll be a greater supply. So, like the first figure there, it'll shift the supply curve to the right because there's just more firms in the market. There's going to be more goods, that particular product being provided. If there's fewer firms, if we're looking at the dying industry, VHSs, cassette tapes, hell, even like DVDs and Blu-rays at this point, so people are streaming everything. We'll have firms leaving those markets, so the supply decreases. And then finally, expected future prices. So if a firm anticipates the price of a product will be higher in the future, it might decrease its supply today in order to increase that in the future. So kind of like the consumer waiting until they can buy cheaper. In this case, you have the firm waiting until they can sell at a higher price. So they'll decrease, in this case, decrease their supply today and then increase it in the future. Ironically, what it ends up doing, this process where the firm decreases supply today and then tomorrow increases the supply when it knows it's going to have a higher cost, it ends up keeping the price about stable. Even though the price is lower today as they put out less, so there's a lower supply, that's going to put upward pressure on the price. Then when they sell extra in the future, that's going to put downward pressure on the price. So it ends up keeping it much more stable than if they didn't do that. Okay, we're going to skip that. All right, let's go through this. Basically, change in quantity supplied versus a change in supply. Same thing as demand. So change in the quantity supplied is a change in the price that causes movement along the supply curve. So moving from $400 to $500, we'll move from point A to point B on the original supply curve. So we're moving along the supply curve, and we change in the quantity supplied. Any other change in those 5 factors we talked about that's going to affect supply will cause the entire supply curve to shift. So we'll move from S1 to S2. So we'll stay at the price of $450, but move from point B to point C. This is a change in supply. Does that make sense? All right, let's take a break. I think we've covered everything for these 2 sections. Yeah. You guys have any random questions?
Did you ever decide how you're going to prank your friends for that thing you're doing?
I have a couple good ones written down. I saw something the other day. You could mail someone a puzzle, and the outside it looks like super nice, but then when you put it together, it's like a bunch of dog shitting. So I'm going to do one of those because one of my friends likes doing puzzles. I wrote these down.
You should do that and take one piece out of it. So they can never finish it.
That's mean. I did it to my sister before. One time I got her book for Christmas, but I glued all the pages together. We prank each other back and forth.
So remember how I said I was a bad driver?
That's shocking to me.
Well, my little sister started driving, and last week she like knocked over. She backed up into a brick mailbox, and she just knocked the whole thing over. It was so funny. It took like 4 grown men to get it back up. And then one of the
What kind of
guys-
car was she driving? She knocked over a solid brick thing.
Just a Jeep, like a Jeep Cherokee. She said like her car's completely fine, but, and then one of the guys who was trying to help get her back up, like had to go to the hospital because he like post finger. It was so funny. I was like, it's nice to be on the other end for a change.
I have a family friend who like made a huge deal about working up the money to buy himself a new car, and he finally did. And as soon as he got it, he backed out of his garage. The garage was yeah, the car was almost totaled. Yeah. I don't know how fast he was going, but the garage.
What was the garage door made out of? Steel?
I have no idea. All I know is that it was an old like crappy car, and so he hit it pretty fast because he could have sworn he opened it. And he hit it, and the whole back of it was just smushed, and the whole garage needed to be replaced.
That sucks, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
My aunt never looked at her back, like never looked when she was backing up to like her garage. She always trusted her beeper, but her beeper broke one day and she didn't know, so she backed right to the garage.
Wow.
Bad driving runs
I know.
One time I backed into my boss's truck, so.
Are you new at work?
Well, I don't know, she was very understanding. And it didn't leave a mark on her truck, but like the one tail light, like, it was my dad's like car before I got my car. And so she like hopped right under the car and like pushed it out. And she's like, see, don't have to tell your dad. She was really cool about it.
There was something I was going to say, but I don't remember now. I'm thinking about going on a hike this weekend. You guys have any good suggestions? Hike like somewhere nearby? Okay, off campus.
At night.
I don't know, within like 2 hours.
Indian Steps.
Where's that?
It's in Rockville State Forest. It's by like State College.
Have you been to 1,000 Steps?
I have. You been to like the real top? 'Cause you do like 1,000 steps and you're like,
It's
you're
like
not done.
10,000 steps.
Like everyone stops there, there's like 300 more after that.
Yeah.
You get that amazing view.
Yeah, my dad did that once, and I was coming down, and I was on the edge, like, by the, obviously, the edge of the mountain. My legs were shaking, and I was gonna fall down the mountain.
I guess the worst part of like going up a mountain is like it's all like the hard work to get up. But when you get up there, you have to get back down, and that just kills your legs.
I refused to go there because one time somebody on Facebook posted this picture of like 5 rattlesnakes just over the steps, and I was like, I'm not going there. Nope.
It's on Facebook. It has to be real, right?
Okay.
My sister told me Canoe Creek, but I've never been there. So I don't know.
Canoe Creek.
It's close to here, apparently, like Hollidaysburg, but I have no idea what it's like.
Apparently, there's one from like Hollidaysburg, Duncansville, like that area, like all the way up to Crescent.
Six Adventure Hub.
Is that what it's called?
It's not really like hiking. It's like a gravel road.
Oh, okay.
So I thought it was like, you just walk on a gravel road. Really
A
cool.
lot of people
Some
bike
sucks.
it. Yeah, a lot of people do.
Oh, so like a
it's
biking
for
trail,
biking,
really?
not-
Okay.
not hiking. But there's like side trails. You go off. Like up every mountain.
Just don't get lost.
That's the key. Don't get lost.
The Buttermilk Falls is really nice.
Buttermilk Falls.
Yeah, it's about like an hour or so away in Ithaca. It used to be owned by Mr. Rogers, but when he passed away, we donated it to the public and now it's a public park.
Cool. All right, these are some good choices. Everything closed. I need something to do on the weekends. Okay, so now we're going to put together demand and supply. Talk about equilibrium, and then we can get into like the fun stuff of shifting supply and demand curves. I'm obviously like fun relative to what we've been doing. So market equilibrium, it's a situation where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. So people are willing to buy exactly as much as firms are willing to provide. This is like the goal. This is like the where you want to get to. So we're working with perfectly competitive markets. So there's many buyers and sellers. There's a lot of competition going on, which helps drive the movement towards equilibrium. So in one of these markets, your equilibrium is going to be called a competitive market equilibrium. Basically just saying this is a perfectly competitive market, lots of buyers and sellers, good stuff going on. The textbook says there's about 25 firms selling smartwatches. So we're going to assume this is enough to generate competitive behavior in the market for smartwatches. Even if there's not a lot of firms in a market, you can still have good competition as long as you have the threat of new entrants. So if it's easy enough for a firm to begin manufacturing and selling smartwatches, the firms that are in the market right now have to act as if those other firms are competing with them, because they start charging too high prices, start producing crappy smartwatches. It'll give these other firms an opportunity to enter and begin competing. So even if 25 firms isn't considered a lot, the fact that if others can easily enter, then it makes it as if it is competitive. In some industries it's true. That's very easy to get in. Others, it's very difficult. So like manufacturing cars takes a ton of money before you begin producing cars. So the existing car manufacturers are pretty insulated from competition. So here's a market equilibrium, putting together the supply curve and the demand curve that we were working with earlier. So at the price of $350, consumers want to buy 5 million smartwatches. At that same price, producers want to sell 5 million smartwatches. So this is the goal. This is the situation that we want. We don't have any excess products, so there's no products sitting on shelves being unsold, that their production was wasted. That could have been used to produce something else that people value more. And there's no shortage. We don't have people left over that want to buy smartwatches that can't because there just aren't enough that are produced. So in this case, the equilibrium price is $350. And the equilibrium quantity is $5. And again, those are where the supply and demand curves cross. And since buyers and sellers want to trade the same quantity, we're working with 5 million smartwatches at this price, we don't expect the price to change. Once we reach this point, unless something else changes and we shift the supply or demand curve, price won't change because there's nothing going on incentivizing them or encouraging them to change the price. I don't know if I talked about it yet, but might as well talk about it here. In the real world, supply and demand curves shift all the time, very frequently. So we don't stay in equilibrium for very long. We're constantly moving in and out of equilibrium. But as we'll go through how the invisible hand works, this competitive pressure keeps moving us back towards the new equilibrium. So let's say the price is $400 instead. Even though the equilibrium price is $350, firms decide to price it at $400. They're not sure what equilibrium is ahead of time because firms really don't know the supply and demand curves. So at the price, the $400 price, consumers want to buy 4 million smartwatches. It's where the $400 intersects the demand curve. So consumers want to buy 4 million smartwatches. At the same time, at $400, firms want to sell 6 million. So where that $400 crosses the supply curve, right there, 6 million. Because of the price of $400, it makes sense to produce that many. If they can get $400 back, which in this case they think they do, they'll produce and try to sell 6 million. So what we end up with is a surplus. Because there's more goods out there than what people are willing and able to buy, we end up with a surplus. So that's the definition. Situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So in this case, we've got this surplus. Sellers begin competing amongst themselves. They're going to drive down the price. They say, hey, we've got these smartwatches sitting on the shelves. What are we going to do? We're going to lower the price. People see a lower price, they'll jump on it and buy it. Well, as one firm does that, another firm does that, another firm sees them doing that and does the same thing, and it slowly forces the price down. And as they lower the price, and move along the supply curve, the consumer demand is going to increase until they reach the $350. At that point, they don't have any more incentive to lower the price because they've sold all the smartwatches they produced. All right, what if the opposite happens? What if firms price too low? They I don't know, they have a wrong estimate of what consumer demand is. They think consumers don't really want it when in fact consumers love the product. So they price it at $250. In this case, producers only want to sell 3 million smartwatches because that's all they can afford to sell at that price. If they try to produce more, they try to produce 5 million, at 250 they'd be losing money. Obviously, they're not going to do that. They're doing it for very long. Well, at $250, a lot more people are willing to buy smartwatches than in equilibrium. So at this point, there's 7 million consumers that are willing to buy smartwatches at the price of $250. So this is a bad situation for consumers. We end up with a shortage of smartwatches. In this case, a shortage of 4 million. So in this case, the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied. So at this point, sellers are going to realize they've got these empty shelves. These smartwatches are flying off the shelves. They can barely get enough in. So what they're going to do is start increasing the price. Once they start increasing that price, not only is it going to slow down slow down the smartwatches flying off the shelves, consumer demand is going to decrease from 7 million to 6 million. At the same time, they're going to increase the supply of smartwatches. Now that you're increasing the price, you can afford to produce more. Whether it's paying for more resources to actually build the smartwatches, whether you're paying more for employees to work overtime, or hiring more employees. As they increase the price, the supply is going to increase, the quantity supplied is going to increase, and the quantity demanded is going to decrease until we reach $350 and that 5 million quantity, moving us back to equilibrium. This is what Adam Smith called the invisible hand, is these incentives that encourage consumers and encourage sellers to buy and sell like at the equilibrium. No one tells the sellers to do this, no one tells the buyers to do it, but because of the incentives created, it's as if someone is guiding them towards equilibrium. So even if they mistakenly price it too low or price it too high, they're moved towards equilibrium. Now, supply and demand both count. This sounds kind of simplistic, but the price is determined by, and the quantity demanded, is determined by the interaction of buyers and sellers. It's both parties that help determine this. In a competitive market, so in most markets, neither one group can dictate the price. So if there's a bunch of firms that are selling smartwatches, they can't dictate the price. They don't have the power, they don't have some sort of power to be able to do that. They have to be responsive to consumer needs and consumer demands, and the consumer's demand. Likewise, the buyers, the consumers, are unable to just dictate the price in a competitive market. We're not going to talk about it in here, but in Principles of Micro, we'll talk about markets that are less competitive, like characteristics and what's going to happen there. But for now, while we're talking about competitive markets, buyers and sellers both count equally in determining the price and like equilibrium. Yeah, so it's Friday, there's a couple minutes left. Next time we're going to start with the effect of shifts in the supply and demand curve on equilibrium.